Alright, today I'm going to show you how to replace the kickstarter spring on a 2012 KTM 50 SX. This should be generally the same anywhere from 2009 on up. The only difference is your clutch is going to look a little bit different. So first thing I did was I removed the exhaust pipe expansion chamber just to get it out of the way. Took that off. Drain the oil and then drain the coolant, because ideally you want to separate the coolant hose there so that you can get the whole thing out of the way. If you use engine ice, save it so that you can reuse it. So those are the first couple steps. So once you've done all that, then loosen your bolts around the outside of the cover. I recommend sticking them into a piece of cardboard with a drawing so that you can remember which screw goes where. Then once you remove this cover, so you pull this off of the shaft, set that off to the side. That'll expose the kickstarter mechanism shaft. So I'm going to remove that. You can just kind of pry it out to the side there. You can see underneath there is the broken spring. So it is in fact in two pieces. Note that there is a little washer there that sits on that little dowel, so don't lose that. That's important to make sure all the spacing is correct when you put it all together. So I'm going to fish that old spring out of there. Okay, next you're going to remove the kickstarter idler shaft. Set that off to the side. And this little, how you doing? Set that off to the side. We'll go into how to install that when we put it all back together. And then you're going to have to remove your clutch in order to get the spring installed back underneath there. To remove the clutch, this is the 2009 to 2012 style 3-shoe clutch. I use a clutch holding tool from Tusk. Of course you can buy a special tool from KTM, but unless you're a millionaire you're probably not doing that. Or you can also use an impact gun. That'll work just fine to get this bolt off. From 2013 to newer, this clutch assembly is going to be different, so this is going to not apply. But all I do is hold the clutch basket with this holding tool and then use your standard 13mm to loosen that bolt. Once you've got that bolt off, you're going to remove the clutch basket and then pull off the clutch assembly and make sure the little needle bearings stay on the shaft as you remove that. So once you've got that out of the way, then you can start with reinstalling your spring. So the new spring looks like this. It's one piece. It's just going to drop down in this hole, and the one tab has to go right down in here. So that's what's gonna hold it in place. After that, you're gonna make sure that that little washer is sitting on that dowel, and then you're gonna get your kickstarter shaft in this little hole. This is where the spring goes, and then you just got to turn that as you install it, pushing it down into the case. And yep, so that is going to require you to probably get somebody to hold it for you, because it will have a tendency to pop it back out. But that right there, if you can see that, that is how you want it to look while you install the rest of basically the clutch. Once you have that clutch back in place, that will stay put right there. So once you got the clutch set back in there, the gear on the back side of the clutch will basically hold the kickstarter shaft down in place so that it can't pop out anymore and have things hit you in the face. So once you got that in there, you're simply going to drop the idler shaft back into position. Just kind of turn that so it falls into place. And you're going to take this little thing, which I forget what it's called, and you're going to set it on top there. Line the gears up, and then what you're going to want to do is this little metal spring part here needs to line up with this line right here, and that can just move freely on the back side. So you're just going to want to turn it so that it lines up with that molding on the engine casing, because this little part sticking up here is going to fit into the cover that you're going to set on top of there, and that's what's going to make sure that that thing is in the correct place when it all goes back together. One thing I forgot to mention is make sure that you've got this washer back on that shaft before you drop this pulley in place, because you won't be able to get it down past that idler once it's in place. So just make sure that's on there. Once you got all those pieces in there, you're going to take, for the 09 to 12s, get your clutch basket and position that back on over the clutch, like so. And then you're going to, again, use a clutch holding tool to tighten that bolt down, just the reverse of removal. So this bolt here that is going to hold the clutch basket in place needs to be tightened down to 22.1 foot-pounds or 30 Newton meters, and I would recommend putting some blue Loctite on there. And please, whenever you're doing engine work, anything messing with aluminum engines, I highly recommend using a torque wrench. Even though you think your arm is calibrated, it's real easy, especially when you're dealing with these engine cover type bolts that really don't need a whole lot of torque at all to strip them if you're not using a torque wrench, and that will make your life infinitely more difficult the next time. So use a torque wrench. Once you've got that clutch back in there, I would recommend replacing this gasket. If your other one is old, you can reuse them if they're in good condition. Once you've had them off, they do kind of tend to get saturated with oil when you reuse them. So a new one will definitely work better. But if the other one is not damaged at all, they are reusable to some extent. Make sure you have your dowels. There's 3 of them. Odds are when you pull the cover off, they'll come off with the cover, but that's fine if they're in the cover, but they will help line the gasket up. So I pull them out of the cover and stick them in the engine before installing that cover. And once you've done that, just make sure all your pulleys are in place, all the teeth that are supposed to engage with each other are engaged. Make sure your shaft there is all the way in. Washers are installed, and then you're ready to put the cover back on. Now when you're putting this cover back on, everything should slide into place pretty easily. The toughest thing is getting the primary drive gear, which is this one right here, to line up with the water pump gear, which is on the back of the cover. So what I do is I just kind of notice the position of this tooth right here. So I notice that there's a tooth on that casting, and then I look at the primary drive gear, and we know that this little spring right here has to fit into this part of the molding here. So then I just position these teeth. So I position a gap in the teeth right there, because I know that the primary drive gear has a tooth right in the middle there, and then that'll help you line it up as you slide that cover onto the engine. So that's the cover back in place. Takes a little bit of finagling. Just remember, if it's not working, just wiggle it and jiggle it till it falls into place. Don't force it, because that water pump drive gear on the back is plastic, unless of course you've replaced it with like a Nihilo aftermarket part. Now for putting the bolts back into place, the manual is very specific. You're going to install this one right here, this one down here, and this one over here first, and you're just going to kind of position them maybe finger tight, but do not tighten them yet. Next you're going to install this one, then this one, Then this one, again, in that order, just kind of finger tightening them or positioning them before we start tightening them down in a crisscross pattern. Once you've got all those screws in place and finger tightened, you're going to tighten them in a crisscross pattern to 10 Newton meters, which is 89 inch pounds or 7.4 foot pounds. So whenever I tighten cover bolts, this is kind of important to make sure things don't leak. I'll just go a little by little across in crisscross patterns, you know, no more than a quarter turn at a time until you're at the point where they torque down at the proper value. Again, use a torque wrench is recommended. And then this cover here, the cover that goes across, same thing, 10 Newton meters or 89 inch pounds, again in a crisscross pattern. Once you've got all those covers back in place and tightened down, you're going to install the Kickstarter shaft. And basically you'll notice that I lined it up so that the curved part is basically just right up against the clutch cover there. That way when it comes out, it's in a nice forward position and you'll get a good stroke. And when it's up, it's nice and out of the way. So from that point, you're just going to tighten down this little screw here. Be careful, it only requires like 4.4 foot-pounds of torque, so very little. And of course, it's one of those little Torx heads, so don't strip that. Don't forget to reinstall your brake pedal. I moved that out of the way when I started. Install the expansion chamber and then give it a whirl.